Welcome to Times Talk OT. Today we are going to be exploring the topic of occupational injustices. Occupational alienation describes when an individual feels isolated, powerless, and/or estranged from society or their occupational identity because the occupation they are participating in does not meet their needs. Someone might experience occupational alienation because they lack a choice in the occupations they do, have limited opportunities to be creative in their occupations, or experience a disconnectedness from themselves or society. Brazilian occupational therapist Clara Adriana Vieira do Nascimento and their colleagues considered how bereavement can cause people to experience occupational alienation. They note that the changes in a person's occupational repertoire and the form of their occupation can change when the value they place on the occupation changes. For example, if an individual finds the occupation of walking meaningful because they go on walks with their partner to feed the birds, the occupation of walking might not be meaningful and might be something they feel alienated from if and when their partner dies. In recognizing the occupational alienation experienced by bereaved individuals, Clara created the Garden of Occupations reflective tool. This helps people consider what can you plant or replant in your garden of occupations today. This tool aims at addressing the disempowerment that people experience occupational alienation often feel. It also helps to give these individuals autonomy, creative opportunities, and an insight into the ways their bereavement has experienced their occupational identity. When we think about occupational alienation, we can think generally about the experiences of many people with mental health issues. These individuals are at greater risk of becoming alienated from their occupations due to feeling disconnected from their sense of self, their goals, and their communities. But an interesting study by Bryant et al. In 2004 found that even in settings where individuals are getting support for their mental health, they can experience occupational alienation. The participants in the study were attendants at a day centre service for people with mental health difficulties. They described experiencing occupational alienation through their powerlessness within the setting. They were unable to make choices about their day-to-day activities. Additionally, they experienced a feeling of estrangement from the occupations due to the separatedness between the day service provision and the activities and the wider community. The day centre was somewhere that the individuals went to, away from the mainstream community, as people socialised with other people with mental illness, or those that were employed to support them, and not people outside of those two groups. Whilst the experiences of service users were positive, they continued to experience occupational alienation, which the services were part of perpetuating as opposed to preventing. Occupational apartheid describes the segregation of people based on personal factors such as their age, gender, ethnicity, social class, which can restrict or deny access these individuals have to meaningful participation in daily life activities. There are hundreds of restrictions experienced by women and girls living in Afghanistan, including that they have to leave whenever they leave their house, they must veil their whole bodies. They must not be heard to sing or read aloud, even in their own homes. Women cannot speak in public, nor attend secondary school. They are unable to walk in public parks, nor attend gyms. These restrictions create a profound experience of occupational apartheid, wherein women and girls living in Afghanistan are restricted and denied access to meaningful occupations such as singing, walking in the park, expressing their identity through wearing the clothes they choose, learning, socializing, going to the gym, amongst many more occupations. When I was in secondary school, there was a profound segregation between the sporting opportunities between males and females. Boys were encouraged to play football and rugby no matter whatever the weather, whilst girls were given more indoor sporting opportunities such as badminton, gymnastics and dance. Recent research has shown that only 43% of girls are given the same options for sport in PE lessons and extracurricular sports at school as their male counterparts. It should not be normalized from any age that males and females can or should be given different opportunities to access or engage in occupations that might provide meaningful and enriching experiences. Whilst this may not seem like such a big deal, it actually is. Males and females were given different opportunities based on their perceived gender identity, which limited the sports they were encouraged to explore. There should be no differences in the sporting opportunities and experiences given to males and females in school. Occupational deprivation is when an individual is restricted from engaging in necessary or meaningful activities due to external circumstances or factors such as policy, geography, or political climate. Some of you might have come across the term postcode lottery. This typically describes the inequalities in access to healthcare, education, and social support that people receive when they live in different areas of the UK. But the UK has a government that ensures whilst these inequalities exist, the general needs of communities are universally met. However, in some countries, there are more systemic experiences of inequality that impact the occupational engagement of individuals. In the Gambia, for instance, children with disabilities experience many barriers to access in education, which may manifest in occupational deprivation. There are very few schools for children with disabilities, and they are all located in urban areas. For a child with a disability living in a rural location, it is very hard and very unlikely that they will receive a differentiated and supportive educational experience. Whilst mainstream schools are plentiful in the Gambia, these schools often do not have the resources to accommodate children with disabilities. For instance, these schools do not have access to specialist equipment to teach blind children. They are not accessible to children in wheelchairs, nor do they have the provision of one-to-one support for children with learning disabilities. These barriers mean that these children have real difficulty in accessing education, which creates occupational deprivation. They are restricted from accessing the occupation of education that would provide them meaningful opportunities for learning and social interaction. People in the UK also experience occupational deprivation. People with disabilities who are unable to work often have to rely on care from other people, including family members, and financial support from the local authority and government. Some people also benefit from specialist equipment such as hoists, wheelchairs, or adaptations to their homes. Without these resources, their access to all occupations are negatively impacted. The Learning Disability Today news reported the story of Reese in 2024. Reese was left without basic equipment such as a hoist or an accessible bathroom. Reese's parents had to support him to use a commode and a bucket in his bedroom, and to carry him to the family bathroom once a week to have a shower. Reese's story demonstrates that external circumstances, such as lack of funding, waiting times for adaptations, and specialist services, can lead to people experiencing occupational deprivation. Occupational imbalance is when an individual does not have enough occupations to fill their time. There are people who experience being underoccupied. So this is when an individual has too few occupations, or there are people who are overoccupied when they have too many occupations. These experiences of being under or overoccupied can impact an individual's well-being, may cause them to experience stress and or boredom. Around the world, there are approximately 11.5 million people in prison, which is approximately the same number of people who live in Belgium. Wherever an individual is imprisoned, they experience restrictions that can limit their occupational participation and induce occupational imbalances. Many people who reside in prisons in Colombia do not have access to education, opportunities for learning new skills, and instead often struggle to access resources that allow them to meet their basic health and safety needs, including clean drinking water, sanitary living conditions, and healthcare. Similarly, the opportunities available for occupations of leisure and self-care are limited for people detained in prisons in Russia. Many spend the majority of their time locked in their cells and do not have access to the space, resources, privacy or liberty to engage in occupations that are meaningful. In contrast to the lack of occupational opportunities and activities those who are in prison have access to, some people can experience occupational imbalance because they are doing too many occupations, or the occupations they are engaging with taking a large amount of their time. This is a form of occupational imbalance which is often experienced by familial caregivers. Research has found that 1 in 5 parent caregivers leaves their paid employment because they cannot balance their care and work responsibilities. This demonstrates that caregivers often have a significant number of occupations related to their role as a caregiver, which detracts from their time they can spend in other occupations, such as work. This occupational imbalance may have a detrimental impact on the occupation of sleep for these caregivers. Researchers show that family caregivers sleep between 2.5 and 3.5 hours less a week than their non-caregiving peers. Finally, research has also demonstrated that 1 in 4 parents of disabled children work the equivalent of 3 full-time jobs through caring for their children. This means they are providing over 100 hours of care a week. The impact of this occupational imbalance is that caregivers are at greater risk of experiencing exhaustion, burnout, mental health issues, and stress. Occupational inconsideration is described in literature as when those in authority knowingly or unknowingly disregard the contributions and perspectives of disabled people when they are designing new policies or creating services. Identifying when an individual or group might have experienced occupational inconsideration is sometimes more difficult than identifying the other forms of occupational injustices. Our experiences of policy are often dependent on our intersections, such as our ethnicity and our disability, our social class and our education, and our financial income. And it is hard to identify that a group of disabled people are disadvantaged by a policy because they are disabled and not because of another factor. Nevertheless, occupational inconsideration can include the instances where policymakers and service providers fail to respond to the inequities experienced by the disabled community. In New Zealand, the Community Housing Collective conducted research to explore the housing experiences of disabled and non-disabled people. They found that disabled people were more likely to live in rented accommodation and live in mouldy homes compared to non-disabled people. Additionally, people with disabilities experience greater challenges when finding alternative accommodation because of the barrier of inaccessibility. The Community Housing Collective and the Disability Rights Commissioner in New Zealand have campaigned for policies to ensure that all new houses in New Zealand are accessible and built with a standardised universal design of inclusivity. However, despite years of campaigns, the New Zealand government has not implemented this policy. This is a form of occupational inconsideration, as the housing needs of the disabled community are being ignored, despite the policymakers having the capacity to positively impact the lived experiences of disabled communities. Occupational inconsideration is also experienced by disabled people living in the UK. The UK government has a benefit for people with long-term disabilities, for which they can receive support for their additional living expenses and/or mobility expenses that people with disabilities often experience. However, only 52% of those who apply for this benefit are approved. Similarly, from the perspective of occupation, the experiences of daily living that are assessed as part of a person's eligibility for the benefit might not truly convey the difficulties a disabled person has in navigating life, nor the additional expenditure they incur due to their disability. Additionally, the benefit system does not equitably support the 31% of disabled people and the 38% of people with long-term mental health conditions who are unable to work. The additional expenses associated with their disability and health and the barriers these groups face in accessing work are often overlooked in assessing the eligibility for benefits and assigning funds to support these communities. Overall, many people experience occupational inconsideration as policy and service providers fail to support people with disabilities to have an equitable quality of life and financial security. People experience occupational marginalisation when they are prevented from participating in occupations that they value or are prevented from choosing their own occupations. When a refugee embarks on the journey of leaving their home, they face starting a new life in a new place with new challenges that may prevent them from doing occupations that they value or from choosing the occupations they engage in. For the Rohingya Muslims, exiled from the Buddhist majority country of Myanmar, living in the Kutta Palong refugee camp, they experience daily experiences of occupational marginalisation. They are prevented from doing occupations linked to their spiritual practices, such as worshipping in a mosque and receiving religious instruction. In addition to these restrictions, they also experience huge difficulty in not being able to choose the occupations they do. The Rohingya Muslims are considered stateless. They are not welcomed in Myanmar nor in Bangladesh, which borders Myanmar. They do not have the freedom of movement. Instead, they face barriers getting paid employment and have difficulties of obtaining houses outside of the refugee camps. We can also see examples of occupational marginalisation in the UK. Consider the lived experience of the 122,000 people who are living in modern slavery in the UK. These people experience occupational marginalisation on a daily basis. They are often forced to engage in occupations that are not meaningful, are denied access to medical care, are forced to engage in occupations that are dangerous or humiliating. They face threats of violence and limited financial compensation for their work. They are frequently prevented from choosing the occupations that they engage with and are often restricted from engaging in occupations that they find meaningful. When working with clients, it is really important to be mindful that they may not have had choices to engage in occupations currently or previously due to their personal experiences of occupational marginalisation. Thank you for listening to this presentation about occupational injustices. If you have any suggestions for future content, please email timetotalkot@gmail.com. Thank you. Bye.